Hey Brett, it's great to see you. Happy Friday.
Thank you. Happy Friday, Drew. It's great to be here talking with you. I briefly introduced you before you joined as a longtime friend and colleague and Columbia psychiatrist and all around great nutritional psychiatrist and author of the new book How to Beat Depression and Anxiety. Um, so yeah, thanks for being here. And I
I,
was
I
just
have a new favorite introduction, everybody, that I like, which is that I'm the first character in Brett's new book. I mean, that's that.
it's
If
true.
you open it, and I didn't know. Brett hinted that I was in there, and I thought that would be buried in like chapter 9 in there. He starts it out at the American Psychiatric Association annual meeting in Toronto. What was that, 2015?
Yep.
And where we're serving oysters to people because and so that brought tears to my eyes this morning. My wife will tell you, and so will my children. So think that's a wonderful way to start. But congratulations, both of us also have our books coming out on Tuesday, everybody. So we wanted to come on here and talk about brain health and mental health, especially now during the pandemic. I was really excited to talk to Brett because I want to pick your brain, Brett, a little bit about what you learned because your book is my books are easy. It's like everybody on here is a health professional. Eat the stuff you obviously know to eat. That's good for your brain and your mental health. But um, you really did this deep dive into the evolution of the human brain. And I was really curious, like, what did you learn that changed some of how you operate day to day? Were there any lessons that you're like, wow, like this is really important?
Yep. Well, it certainly changed how I eat related to you and this conversation. Yeah, so I'll just get some backstory. That meeting, so that session that you gave at the American Psychiatric Association meeting, that was, I think, 2015. I was walking around the conference hall early in the morning, just trying to figure out what sessions to go to that day. And I saw this huge scrum of people, like, something big was going on.
It
And
was insane. I couldn't believe there were like people sitting in in the like aisles between the chairs. I'd never ever seen that at a professional meeting. I was thrilled and terrified all at the same time.
yeah, I
They
mean, it
called the
was,
they called the fire marshal actually
they really,
almost.
it was mayhem. So I waited outside. I finally got in, and the first thing I see is you up there. We didn't know each other with a plate of oysters, handing out these raw oysters to a bunch of psychiatrists. Um, and then the talk was great, and you and Emily Deans from Harvard kind of got into how the evolutionary backstory behind what's healthy for our brains and how seafood is such an important source of nutrients like DHA, omega-3s. And so a couple of years later, when I was approached about a book proposal, that moment was like, you know what? That was a really interesting light that went on. Like, how did our brains get here? How did diet play a role? And not only diet, the book ended up being like everything that sort of shaped our brain cognitive evolution from socializing to fire to cooking food. But it really, a diet was a big part of it. So yeah, so the fascinating part for me in terms of diet was just kind of understanding how primates have eaten for millions of years. How, how does the chimp diet and the bonobo diet compare to the human diet and the Australopithecine diet and Homo erectus and just how important it was. And there are many important facets, but fire was
I'm just showing
huge.
this is one of the. I mean, everybody watching I think is probably like a science nerd, and so the great thing about Brett's book I found was it's this mix of great story, but also those of us who are science hungry, and I think a lot of the Medscape audience, a lot of you are
Yeah.
quite educated in medicine and health. Brett, you do such a good job of telling us the story, but also these graphs and graphics where you describe this. I just love. What were some of the things you learned? I mean, I've also how do I've been having this question as there's this dietary trend, like let's all go backwards.
Yeah.
Paleo, right?
Paleo, paleo,
Traditional diet is how we say it, nutritional psychiatry. And there's something just in the back of my mind that even though I think traditional foods are really the way to go, that never before in history have we, that I know of in evolution, have we been like, the way they were doing it like 1,000 years ago? Let's do it that way.
yeah. Right.
And so I think part of my question is, if human brains are in evolution, and this is just one stop, should we be eating traditional diets for improved health, or should we be focused on creating the new diet that's going to help our brain evolve?
This was a big question that I had in the book, and it's very divisive. You talk to anthropologists, you talk to psychiatrists. Some are resolute in that certain nutrients, certain ingredients were crucial to driving our evolution. Maybe DHA, for example. Um, Michael Crawford in London, he's convinced that our brains evolved 600 million years ago at sea. So these specific maritime nutrients, these marine nutrients like iodine and DHA, are necessary. And I believe that they are to some degree, but others think it was calories in and calories out. And it was really more that selection was acting on other cognitive pursuits, driving our big brains and the growth of our brains.
Just to break that down, I mean, we got fire, we got more food, we got smart enough, like we can kill all kinds of stuff and eat all this. And so now there's enough calories that other things that are driving evolution besides diet kind of take over.
Right. So the moment we start walking on 2 feet, we become bipedal, our hands are freed up. So we're pursuing all these other things, whether it's hunting, tool making, fire making. So you need a lot of, picking things, all the good stuff. But so the moment you kill a big animal, megafauna, when we start hunting a couple million years ago or a million years ago, that provides consistent calories for days, and you don't have to forage all day long. So selection can then act on other pursuits and traits and behaviors like skills,
Netflix, shopping on Amazon,
Sure,
stocking my quarantine
screen
closet
time
with canned fish, right? All those things that
all the things,
are driving us evolution. That's can you tell us a little bit about primate diets at least there are some aspects of those that seem really important for, let's just call it, hominoid brains. Because right now, unfortunately, I think part of what I really hope in this book I wanted to try and transcend was this idea that right now we've kind of gone from being focused on fat and cholesterol as evil to like wanting to have a giant food fight about whether you should eat meat or not. And now eat lab-grown meat or not, right? And it seems to me to really miss the point that like the way should we be feeding is to feed our human brain. Like that's the lottery. Like you won it, you got one. It's pretty special in the universe. Like you already got this thing. And so are there lessons from primate diets? And then I'm gonna have to say the word microbiome because I want that to be in your answer.
Oh, I was gonna ask you about that. I mean,
we agreed. We agreed. I get to say microbiome first. We agreed that, Brett.
You have that one. You take that one.
Okay. All right. Sorry.
So primate diet. So yes, I think there are some lessons in there, and I'd be curious how you incorporate some of them into your care and into your book. But if you look at like a chimp diet, they eat about 3% meat. 3% of their diet is meat. Mostly unfortunate monkeys, and the rest is all plant-based. And then you see, once we sort of branched off from chimps about 7 million years ago, you give it a few more million years, then all of a sudden you're seeing 10 and 20% of our diets were composed of meat.
So it's like cannibalistic vegans at first is what we were. It's like they do. What about like other, like they're not eating meat, but they're eating like insects and was it just all like leaves? Are they eating like larvae and grubs and are there and do any of the monkeys eat the seafood?
So monkeys, as opposed to apes, will definitely supplement with bugs, but still mostly a fruit-based vegetarian diet. Chimps, same thing. They will eat bugs. They will eat monkeys, so a little bit cannibalistic for sure. Not much seafood at all until you get to Neanderthals. Homo erectus has been found. Homo habilis has been found from 2 million years ago with catfish bones buried around them. So we think we've been eating seafood for a couple million years.
Human habilis that's the human that started using tools, right?
The tool maker, yeah.
The tool maker.
I think habilis might mean tool maker or something in Latin or something, but yeah. So meat, but then it was really meat, and I talked to a lot of vegetarian anthropologists actually who admitted that once we started eating meat, our brains just exploded. This is about 2 million years ago.
It's so provocative, but I do think one of the clearest things you can show in science is that if you eat a purely vegan diet unsupplemented, that the human brain does shrink. And I don't say that to be provocative. I just think you end up with B12. I didn't say that for hearts. You end up with B12 deficiency. And that's certainly the clearest. That and DHA, I think, are the clearest predictor of kind of maintenance of brain size during human atrophy. And there's a correlation between the Felice Jacka study where, more nutrient-dense dietary patterns, healthier diets, which generally in her studies include meat and seafood, seem to maintain brain size as people age.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was incredibly important to our brain, and I've waffled with meat too. I've gone vegetarian, I've gone back, and I do love it, but I recognize there are moral issues with it, and we have Beyond Burgers and things, and then this sort of lab-grown meat, coming up, and maybe that's a solution. But I do think it was
I
important.
can't, I have such a bias. I can't, it makes me, those lab grown things make me so angry because it just feels like, well, it just feels like it's ultra processed food that's
It does, yeah,
taken on a kind of veneer of, being ethical and being better for the planet that I think is
yeah,
wholly unproven and just marketing. But
yeah.
that's for another time. But the,
They're also not as good. They're also not as good.
well, and it also removes if you think about nutrition that way, if you just think about the cow as the burger and you don't think
Yeah,
the cow is, well, I'm on my farm here in southern Indiana, right? So if you don't think of the
right.
cows what's lowing in the field and part of this whole farm cycle, not in a farm factory way, but in a cycle of the local economy here, a cycle of
Yeah,
the nutrients that the poor people of rural America, like that's what they're used to. And so
yeah,
there
yeah.
is a way that the meat argument really takes on to me, a different look as you think about the current food system, poverty, and the lack of real nutrition. It's
Yeah.
not meat that's causing the problem. I think it's highly processed food and all the processed carbs. And I don't know. I don't think that's so controversial anymore.
Well, I'm curious how you talk about, I mean, I know you talk about it in here, Eat to Beat Depression, but how do you talk to your patients about like meat consumption in terms of mental illness and psychiatry?
Yeah, when I first started getting into this work, my first book had a hamburger on the cover, and not, which looks like I'm promoting meat, and I think it was more trying to use meat as a piece of the conversation and as an entry point. And I think I've evolved in my own thinking. I, like you, I was a low-fat vegetarian for about a decade throughout medical school and most of residency. I was full veggie. And so, I understand that diet certainly can support enough brain power to do all that stuff. I don't
Right.
think I was at optimal mental health during those times, but it's easy to look back and kind of wonder what the relationships are. I think when I talk to patients, what I'm most interested in is making sure they don't hear me as somebody who does or doesn't want them to be vegan or vegetarian or paleo or
Right.
because I'm a psychiatrist. And like what I'm
Right.
really
Right.
interested in my clinical room is you being you and
Yeah.
and and that feeling great to you. And if there are some nutritional considerations of that, and somebody said they'd never heard of nutritional psychiatry. Nutritional psychiatry is kind of new. We're in PubMed now. Check it out. There's a couple of good articles about nutritional psychiatry. It's just applying nutrition and the principles of nutrition to mental health clinical scenarios. And so when we talk to patients about food, we do an assessment of what they're eating and then think about what their challenges are. So if someone comes in and they says, I'm really worried about the ethical impact of eating meat, and I feel really horribly about eating animals. I don't want to participate in that industrialized food system. I'm going to be really curious in that. I'm not going to be like,
Yeah.
oh, you need B12, you need meat, because
Right. Right.
that's my own bias in terms of maybe how I eat, but also that's not my job as a clinician. My job as a clinician
Yeah.
is to be really curious, like, all right, like how do where how are you drawing the lines? Where are you getting your information? Where can I be helpful and provide other information? Here's the things I think about. I think about your B12. I think about vitamin D. I think about certain minerals. I get curious about your plant-based protein game. And
Right.
so, and then I also get curious, I've learned tons of vegans. One of the clinicians in our clinic that we work with is very plant-based and still is mostly plant-based. And I love what I learned from her in terms of I don't know, just ways to make plants super delicious and
Right.
more filling, and so that's how we approach it clinically, and then we just focus on food groups.
Yeah.
So
No, I like that. I mean, pivoting to seafood for a bit, because hence the oysters. That was another big revelation in my book was how, a lot of anthropologists believe humans nearly went extinct in Africa over the years. There was a big population bottleneck 2 million years ago, another one perhaps 150,000 years ago. And a lot of anthropologists think that, we were down to a couple hundred Homo sapiens, if maybe a few thousand, and that learning to track tides and shuck shellfish and source marine foods during low tide may have saved us.
I love
It's controversial, but I loved it.
I love that part of the book also because like I mean it supports my bias, right? But I
Right,
love
right.
the idea of there we are, like the sea means so much. Everybody feels that, right? You get to the edge of
Yeah,
the beach, and the idea that we're really having this kind of genetic spiritual experience of like this is what saved our ancestors,
right,
the
right.
shoreline.
Yep, yep.
But I like it also when you the book Survival of the Fattest really influenced me, Stephen Cunnane, because the idea revolved around some of Crawford's work and this idea that there are these special fats and then more minerality along with more
Right.
calories. And I appreciate you got really deep into that debate. And I think it's one of the hard things about nutrition for people is there's so much science. There's so many experts with lots of degrees and lots of research behind them, like why you should be eating shellfish or why you shouldn't, or why you should be eating food, all plant-based, that I think it's hard for eaters to, see through that right now.
Right.
I tried to focus on that a little bit more because, this is also something that I don't think the humanoids have really encountered that much. But anyway, I want to go back to this bottleneck in so we almost perish.
We almost perished many
And then
times. Yeah.
and well, I think people are worried about that right now. It feels kind of catastrophic. Were there lessons that you learned in the history of the human brain of how it got through catastrophic times? I don't think we're near perishing, but we all felt like we might last year.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, certainly disease and most of these episodes were triggered by climate change. So whatever you think about climate change, that is a concern for many that we could be reliving the past. A lot of this had to do with the African savanna drying up, and so we'd have to leave the forest, and there just wasn't not enough nutrients out there. There was some tubers and rhizomes, but it was tough life.
The
So
savanna
this,
stuff, right? Historically, like brains and other species, as you move into grasslands, the gut gets bigger evolutionarily to like try and suck nutrients, and then brains get smaller, like a rhinoceros. Is that true? I always say that, but
it's true until you get to us, because we had this big brain that was capable of digging up those rhizomes and accessing fish in lakes and finding the coastal foods. So in us, as our brains get big, this is called the expensive brain hypothesis. As you know, and you write in your book, the brain requires a lot of energy, like a disproportionate amount of our glucose.
20, I read like 20% is that it's 2 to 3% of body weight and like 20+% of energy. And then there's
Yep.
some nutrients I don't know what the percentages are, but like, I don't know, there's like 9 times more folate in your cerebrospinal fluid I've seen, or there's
Oh, really?
more of certain, yeah, there's more like 7% of the dry weight of the brain is DHA. So there's just more of that's the longest chain omega-3 fat.
Yeah.
And, and so I think yeah, just point
Well,
people
yeah,
to a lot of
that's
this.
interesting. I get into that fact because that fact, no one knows if it's actually correct because it's based on one study from 1959 that's never been replicated. So now, now,
Like my thoughts. Sorry, wow, that's hilarious.
but
What did the study show?
but everyone agrees it's incredibly metabolically hungry. Whether it's 20% or not, I don't think
Right.
it's been proven, but it's up there with the kidneys are also really hungry. It's not just the brain, but once our brains started getting really big around the time Homo erectus came around 2 million years ago, our guts started shrinking. And this is unique because, like you said, usually it's the other way around. And Richard Wrangham, famous anthropologist at Harvard who studied under Jane Goodall for years, he believes he buys into the expensive brain hypothesis that other organs had to shrink to support such a big brain. And so our GI tract right around then began to shrink because our GI has gotten smaller and smaller and smaller from Australopithecines through Homo erectus.
Well, has it also gotten better? I mean, that's along with size. I mean, I don't know a lot about. I mean, I remember a little comparative anatomy, but we're getting back to college now, and the brain's getting a little
Yeah.
old. No matter how much fish and dark chocolate I eat, eh, but it's interesting how we think about just size. Where even I think at one point our brains got a little smaller, like on a gram for gram basis or pound for
Yeah.
pound basis, but it also got functionally, it seems more specialized. And I wonder if our guts and our GI tract that we both learn how to get food sources from more places with our big brain, but also is there some way that our guts adapt? And I'm curious, just since we're talking gut, like
Right.
give us the microbiome down low of how your evolutionary journalistic adventure affected your thinking about that.
Oh, then I want to get into how you deal with microbiome with your patients. But
It's
yes,
easy. Time out. Eat plants, eat fermented foods. See a doctor if you have GI problems. That's how I deal with it.
that's easy. That's easy.
Yeah.
I respect that. Yeah, the biome's interesting because we obviously are much more prone to, say, food poisoning. So you could say that we're actually not as, we're not as good of digesters as other animals, and that's presumably because we started cooking our food, a lot of our food.
Hmm.
So, our body isn't used to processing nearly as many microbes as other animals. But we also became so omnivorous. We're really like sort of the kings and queens of omnivorism. We can eat anything, and most animals aren't like that. So I think that and I talked to a few people for the book, our biomes are definitely sort of aligned to eating a really diverse array of food, even compared
Hmm.
to, say, a chimpanzee. Um, so
Yeah,
yeah,
I think about all the different foods that the average human eats. We're doing in a week with Men's Health Magazine. I'm doing this whole brain food week, and as
yeah,
we're doing just like a simple recipe, or just focused on a couple foods, but avocados and dark chocolate, wild salmon and
right, right,
anchovies and red peppers, and you see this, and everybody has access to that, and it's
right.
not, the amount of different foods that we eat in a week as a human, and still sustain reasonably consistent uh, emotional regulation,
Right.
cognitive capacity. We still sleep wake cycle pretty much the same. It's really fascinating how
Yeah.
many different things we can eat to feed the brain.
It completely is. And that was my next question for you is, so you've identified what, 12 nutrients that are incredibly important for the brain in your book, right? How did you arrive at those?
Well, it goes back to this conference that you referenced. So at that conference, the woman who bought those oysters was Dr. Laura LaChance, a native of Toronto and a fellow psychiatrist. And she had come to a prior talk that we'd given and had started helping out in our work together. And we got this question of if we wanted to teach psychiatrists, mental health professionals about food, how would we do that? And we started to create a training. And then we kind of scratched our heads and we're like, wow, well, what do you say besides Mediterranean diet? And is
Right.
that practical? Like I said, I'm from rural Indiana. You say Mediterranean diet is that pizza or pasta? Like those
Right.
sound good, right?
Chicken
That's
parm. Yeah.
right, chicken parm. And so how do we translate that kind of science to the clinical scenario? So to find the best nutrients, we just looked at what are called nutrient profiling systems. And this is like the Andy, there are a bunch of different ones where you basically gotta slice and dice up the USDA data of different nutritional contents of different foods. So we looked at all of the scientific literature and we found there were 12 nutrients that had significant data. Our level of significance, we use sort of a standard levels of significance scale, but it basically means you've got both good epidemiological data that you matter to depression, and then
Hmm.
you've got some clinical data that you matter. Like if you give people an antidepressant plus magnesium, or you just give people magnesium, there's some data showing that that is helpful for mood. So we
Hmm.
found these 12 nutrients. We call them the antidepressant nutrients. We created the antidepressant food scale, which was really just trying to say like, okay, if these are the 12 most important nutrients and all of the like debates and conversations about nutrition, we are almost just really in a research stance of like, what are we going to find? Like we had
Wow.
no idea. And so we made a list of, usually they end up also just being plants because plants are so, they're mostly water, so they're always going to be more nutrient dense than an animal, product, which is going to have fat and protein and just more caloric density usually. So we
Right.
made a list of the animals, foods too. And so these aren't the only foods we talk about in the book, in this book for sure. But to me, it was a starting point, one of how do these foods group together? I was the kale guy for like a long time. If you hate kale, he was like right here. I'm sort of the person who, I don't know, I
Doctor.
got like, it's like a man, Brett knew me there. It was like kind of like a hypomanic kale episode. I made a lot, yeah, besides oysters, I've had kale to all the psychiatrists. I've had kale to like, I've fed kale to millions of people at this point. Kale
You
cocktails.
you were Dr. Kale. You were throwing
I
kale
was I
festivals, I
was
remember.
Dr. Kale. I know. I was
Yeah.
like, that's about the time that I met Brett, and thank goodness for you, Doctor. You've really helped me with that. Now they don't call me Dr. Kale anymore, so thank you for that, Brett.
Well, anything, man.
Um,
Anytime.
and the top of the list is not kale; it was watercress. And
Uh,
and actually, if you look at the 10 top plant foods, you see leafy greens and you see what we call rainbow vegetables, right? And so that was interesting. Since most Americans eat beef and chicken and a lot of processed meats and deli meats, what are the animal products that have the most concentration of these 12 nutrients? And the 12 nutrients everybody watching knows. It's like B12, magnesium, iron, the
yeah.
omega-3 fats, potassium, selenium. A few surprises in there, but those are the type of nutrients that we're talking about. So on the animal side of things, the top of the top five, three of them are bivalves: mussels, clams, and oysters. the
Right.
types of food that saved our collective
Saved
ancestors
our lives. Yeah.
years ago on the shoreland as we were pushed out. Yeah, I love the romance you've added to it, Brett. It really makes it even more meaningful because they find these big like middens, I hear, right? These big middens are like
Oh
big,
yeah, yeah.
what are the
Just piles of
holes?
oyster shells. Yeah.
Yeah, or just had the idea they're just like shucking and like,
Yep.
yeah, like how y'all doing? It's like just thinking, doing all this stuff we've never done
Yeah.
before because I can just eat oysters all day.
Yep. Yep.
And so three of the top five are bivalves, and then organ meats, liver is on there. And so you see this kind of wild meats and organ meats, right? Very nutrient dense, and
Yep.
bivalves and fish eggs kind of dominate the top 20 animal foods. Elk is on there.
Yeah, really.
So those foods kind of and that experience helped direct me towards how we structure the book and how we structure things clinically. And I think you alluded to it earlier that instead of saying, we want people to eat plant-based or we want people to eat paleo, we say, here are some food categories that we've discovered and we think are really important for
Yeah.
you to consider. And some don't make the list, like didn't make the antidepressant food scale, but like nuts, beans, and seeds. Super nutrient dense, right? Whole food, lots of fiber.
Yep.
Lots of good stuff for the microbiome. Where are those in your diet? Or fermented foods. You can't really, there's no study now saying, oh, these, this many this colony forming units and, sauerkraut is better for you but that's a food category we focus on. And then in the book, I do a 6-week plan at the end to really try and help people, especially right now. How do you shift through all this advice, transcend diet culture, get motivated, and then go through these 6 weeks where we focus on a food category, and then the final week really end on, in some ways, I'm curious about a part of your book, and then I know we've got to stop, Brett, but I could talk all day to you about your book. But the part of my book is this notion of eat or heal thyself, which is really, in the last part of the plan is for people to try and connect up with their local food system, food community, and food culture. It's like who you are as an eater, and to really try and
Right.
spend some time along with all these like foods that people want you to eat, and I think you should maybe eat. How can you really have a better stance of self-nourishment? And part of that is connecting up with people. And I'm wondering what role our social brain plays in terms of our mental health, and is there something in the research that you saw? We're always talking about like the brain getting bigger and more complex and getting all this stuff, but you have this lovely chapter. I think it's called the softer side, right? Development of the softer side, I think it was. And I'm wondering if you could share with us a little bit of what you learned of how our kind of the need for human love, human connection, um, and community, and
Right.
what, like, is that as wired in as we think it is? I mean, I love that stuff. I think it is. I think it really matters. It seems like isolation makes us like horribly depressed and is bad for our health in all ways. But what did you find in the evolutionary biology?
Yeah, completely. I agree. And honestly, this goes back to some of the earliest primates. I mean, monkeys are one of the most social creatures on
Yeah, they're
Earth.
all like scratching on each other and
Oh,
like
it's grooming and
yeah,
picking and
yeah, I love that. It's like
yeah. Oh, that's what they do, and that's how they form social bonds. That all that grooming is essentially our talking, our communication. And
yeah,
yeah, and chimps even more so. Chimps maintain groups of 100 through some combination of grooming and sounds and gestures. They have well over 100 gestures they use, and they have a proto language almost. And
I love
then
how we just regress into being primates with our spouses and partners, right? When I think it's like, oh,
oh, totally.
there's a lot of grooming, right? And there's a
Yeah,
lot of like secret messages, grunts, movements, signals
grunts.
that
Yeah,
like
I got
only
something in
the
my
chimps,
hair. Can you get
right,
that?
right,
Right.
exactly.
Totally. And one of the really interesting facets of this was once again fire and food. Once we had fire, day extended into night. So you didn't just go back to the camp and sleep. You stayed up and you socialized, you partied, and
So
and
so they
and
say, so they say.
so they say. And that's when we probably developed more complicated language, more complicated social structure, politicking, who's the alpha, who's not, all the
Like
social.
you're like tracing the evolutionary foundations of TikTok right here. It's like basically all this started with fire,
With the
right?
campfire, yeah. E.O. Wilson, famed biologist, writes about that a lot if anyone's interested in the whole camping phenomenon. So yeah, so as we go along, and certainly when we get is it Robin Dunbar, psychologist from England, came up with the Dunbar's number that chimpanzees can maintain, I think 50 friends or acquaintances through their grooming. The moment we had language, it jumps to 150 and it stayed there. We can
How
only,
about the
yeah.
moment I got my cell phone? Because it jumps to like, I mean,
I mean,
I'm gonna say like 400 or 500.
but are
It's
they
kind of a
meaningful? Are they meaning? Well, the key is meaningful relationships. Dunbar showed a few years ago that on average people send 150 Christmas cards. You only have meaningful Twitter interactions with 150 people. And so we capped, but we got a lot more social once we had symbolic communication and
Well,
language.
that's where I wonder. I mean, again, I'm in the traditional camp. I'm here on a farm. I like put my hands in the dirt. But sometimes I wonder about the amount of connectivity in the sense of like, there's some people who even just follow me on Instagram that I've had really like, I don't know. I'm not saying it's a deep relationship, but there's been a meaningful interchange. Remember when there was a woman whose son had really challenging autism, and she changed how she ate, and then she brought the son to like a book signing, and I don't know. It was like it was just really nice to meet her,
Yeah,
and to sort of so there is something to me that feels beyond just like nothing, right? And
right,
in
right,
some ways, because we now get to see somebody like I've never been to your house in upstate, I've never met Amanda, right? But I
right,
feel a real sense of connectedness with you and your wife through your social media feeds. And that I
right.
know you guys and I follow you and I check out your stories and I don't
Yeah.
know, you and I've talked about your raised beds. And so there is this way that our relationship has this depth and enhancement through this new platform that,
Yeah.
I'm gonna put you in you're in my 150 tribe, Brett. And so, we interact personally and at work, and that's been facilitated so much digitally. And so I just really wonder how that's going to affect our brain, right? Where we think of, and I think
Yeah.
everybody watching has that experience, right? Where you're connected to more people. Think about just all the people in high school on Facebook.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, like but that's not something our ancestors ever had access to. Like what they're doing, what all their kids look like, how they
Yeah.
are. Or not. It's like I don't know. I saw that
I
this morning.
I think that's the big question. I mean, the 150 is of course just an estimate, and many people have criticized that as just being arbitrary. But you know, that's the big question at the end of my book actually is what is screen time going to do to our social brains? Like, how, will this literally shape our evolution? Yeah, are they going to get enormous?
Do you
And I
think
don't.
if you combine our two books, right, what will happen if you take these two things together is we're gonna like yeah, it's like if we mash them up, we're going to just well, they say that if everyone was well nourished, like there's an example of iron. There are 2
Yeah.
billion people on planet Earth still with iron deficiency. There's a researcher that estimated that if every person got enough iron in utero and during development, our world IQ would go up by 13%. So we'd
Oh
have like a
wow. Wow.
13% smarter planet, which I think I'd like. I mean, already the planet's got a lot of cool stuff going on. Imagine
Yeah.
13% smarter. But I wonder if, somehow the something about traditional nutrition and maybe something we don't understand yet about new nutrition and the
Yeah.
microbiome and maybe even lab grown foods. Who knows? Hopefully not, but maybe the history of the human brain, I think, is going to still get written, right?
I think so, and I think diet. A lot of people agree diet is hugely important going forward, just because of all the new deficiencies around the world. And then the sort of one of the points I make toward the end of the book is that we just don't know how all this modern technology and social media is going to affect this ancient machine, because we're processing this deluge of new information at a greater rate than ever, but our brains are millions of years old for the most part and haven't been updated, so to speak. So I feel like it's going to be interesting to see what happens next with just all of this information, how diet plays a role in that. What's the global diet look like in 20 years, 30 years?
It's gonna be exciting to see it unfold, and I really
Yeah,
appreciate your summing up for all of us. It's just such a great contribution to the brain health and brain fitness world. what you've done to pull all this together. So I really want to thank you. Lots of people are asking in the comments, everyone. This is Brett Steck. Brett's executive editor at Medscape. He's been my editor at Medscape Psychiatry, and a good friend of mine. And we both have books coming out next Tuesday. Brett's book is A History of the Human Brain, and Brett's a real science journalist and a physician, and just it's an incredibly good book. So please check it out and give him a pre-order. And then I've got a book also coming out on the same day, Eat to Beat Depression and Anxiety. I'm a nutritional psychiatrist, and it's really, I hope, helpful for our community here at Medscape in terms of helping all of us do a little bit better job avoiding burnout and really engaging in self-nourishment and taking care of ourselves. So many of you have been out on the front lines. Everybody in healthcare has been really impacted by COVID, obviously, and nutrition's a part of us getting through that and processing everything. So I hope everybody will check out both of these books. And Brett, I just want to thank you for a great conversation and your friendship throughout the pandemic, and for the book. It's just a real treat.
Oh, back at you, Drew. Your book's amazing. This was really fun. We should do it again, and everyone should go buy it and eat to beat depression. Stay mentally healthy.
Sounds great. Well, everybody, and also it's saying, are we going to save the video? Brett's definitely going to save the video to IGTV and post it. Hopefully, sometimes we run a text glitch, but for sure.
Yeah.
And you can check it out there and share it with folks, this conversation about brain evolution and brain health and how to feed the brain. And I look forward to learning more from you and keeping the conversation going. And everybody take really good care of yourselves over the weekend, and make sure and eat some really nutrient-dense foods like red beans and wild salmon and anchovies and olive oil, and most importantly, enjoy it. Brett, thank you so much.
Thank you, Drew, and thanks everyone for watching. This has been fun. Have a great weekend, everyone. Stay healthy.